Table 1 above shows that the connections with Tonga and Fiji in Samoan oral traditions appear to be strong. It is clear that pre-contact Samoans were aware of the existence of both Tonga and Fiji. However, there also appear to be some distinct differences in the nature of Samoa's relationship to each. In looking at the Samoan legends in the appendix, some thematic differences stand out. Legends that involve Tongan interactions tend to focus more on practical matters such as political machinations, marriages, and war, while legends that involve Fiji usually deal with more mythical themes such as monsters and the supernatural. Also, it is notable that Fijian interaction occurred mostly in the distant past, the foundation of a village in a time long ago. Indeed, Turner, 1984, in his survey of legends involving the founding the founding of villages, found that 18 out of 39, 46% of these legends involve Fiji, while only 6 out of 39, 15% involve Tonga. Interesting. What do you think, Tua?
Mm. Yeah, I mean it's like the further back it goes and the more sketchier it becomes, they tie it to Fiji.
Is it
And
because of the mix, the udi udi over there mixed with the Polynesian? I don't know. I just because even me, it could be maybe a mystic. I don't know. I'm just thinking. Why do you think it's such a?
they're gonna give an interesting analysis on that later on.
Okay, okay.
And it's actually really interesting, and it also ties a little bit to the Cook Islands, because it's the Cook Islands that also have the name Rarotonga.
Rarotonga. Yes.
Eh? And I
Yeah.
just had an interesting idea when I was reading through this article, um, on why possibly the Cook Islands were called Rarotonga.
Okay.
Kind of
Interesting.
interesting. Yeah, go
Okay.
ahead and read this. So this is Samoa and East Polynesia.
Awesome. So the contrast between West and East Polynesia in Samoan oral traditions is significant. There is strikingly little mention of the distinct archipelagos of East Polynesia in any of the sources of Samoan oral history used in this study, particularly in comparison to the mountain of oral traditions that connect Samoa with Tonga and Fiji. Batsi Carmer, 1994. Okay, for some possible connections from Manua to the east. Okay. The Samoan oral traditions are effectively silent on any connections to East Polynesia. This lack of connection is evident in both published Samoan oral traditions and interviews conducted with Samoan recognized as knowledgeable in oral traditions. However, it must be noted that this study is by no means exhaustive. It would be useful to consult the oral traditions of Manua, the most easternly Samoan island group, to look for links to the east. However, there are many more oral traditions published from the more western islands of Samoa than from Manua. It should also be noted that we limit our analysis to mostly published material. Yet there are far more Samoan oral traditions kept only in living memory than published in any book or journal. Interesting. Kind of what we kind of talked about with the connections of Manua to East Polynesia, Tua.
Yes. There's an interesting comment here that's kind of related to this, coming here from Facebook. This is Legrand Maretti. He says, let me just let's change the view here. It says the Westerners saying Samoa had little relations to East Polynesia goes against what you guys say when you said we were all one nation, all traveling to and from one another from trading and wars. If what the Westerners say were true, would would have been just before Europeans came into contact with our people. So, Legrand, my thoughts on this, and then I'll have Masi comment on it, as well, is this: all roads lead to Tongatapu, right? Our position to explain this is Samoa was not the center of the empire, right? Just like when you're in the Roman Empire, there were certain pockets around Rome that had some regional
Mhm.
roads to it or connection. But even then, all of these went to Rome. And when you go to Rome, you would find artifacts and things from all around the Roman Empire. And not every part of the Roman Empire was fluid and had direct relations to Rome. So that's kind of the thought process there. So in theory, the Tu'itonga, whose primary residence was on Tongatapu, and we won't have time today just looking at the time, but there are archaeological studies that show stone products in Samoa 99.9%
From
from
Sam.
within Ha'amoa.
Mm.
You go to Tonga, 60% of the stone axes that they studied at the Tongan settlement, 60% were from East Polynesia, Fiji, Ha'amoa, and other parts of Polynesia. So that is kind of my initial response to that, Legrand. We were one nation, but not all parts of the nation or the cities, like the villages, did not all have the same traffic as the capital did. Any thoughts
Mm.
on that, Masi?
No, and just to add on, I think another big significance to it, because right now they're just focusing on Upolu and Savai'i, right, and the islands surrounding those two major islands. Um, to my understanding, and it's a good question here by Legrand Maretti. The only Polynesian people that's probably traveled the most were the Tongans. They traveled in the traditional way up to the 1800s, and even up to the even early 1900s. They were still traveling to different parts of Samoa, up to Fiji, right? Up to all the way to Fiji, because that knowledge of navigating was a strong part of Tonga. And that's the reason why in our place in Mua in Talasiu, where we have strong connections and even Eastern Polynesian dancing and different reference to Eastern Polynesia that's still maintained in Tongatapu, and also
Mm-hmm.
stories of Hawaii with Nua coming to marry um, the
The Tu'itonga.
Tu'itonga during that time. I think it's Momo. So we have that connection. That's the story. That's in Tonga. The Our connections to Fiji and Samoa, obviously, and like I mentioned, with Eastern Polynesia. That's the Polynesian nation, and they were still in those days still migrating. Why is that still relevant in Tonga? Is because the Inasi played a big deal. The Inasi is
Mm-hmm.
where they came and gave their gave their respect and offerings to the Tuitonga and the Polo Polo, which was the the ancient religion, Polynesian religion. So those stories are still relevant, and that's why there's probably strong connections to the other Polynesian islands in Tongatapu compared to Ha'amoa, which they're still trying to figure out, and they're trying to reference to Manua, which we've kind of talked about earlier to their connections to Eastern Polynesia. That's just me, Tua, on that.
No, 100%.
Good question, though.
Appreciate the question there, Legrand. Thank you. So in this portion here, it talks about one potential connection to East Polynesia, which is one oral history about the Cook Islands. And then it
Mm,
says here, perhaps the Cook Islands served an intermediary role between East and West in the same way, but to a lesser extent than Tonga may have served an intermediary role in West Polynesia, as we shall see. Now, what this made me think of, Masi, is remember the Tu'itonga at the height of the Polynesian Empire, he recognized the burden it was for every corner of the empire to come to Tongatapu in twice a year,
yeah.
right? For the Inasi to kind of pay their tax, it's kind of viewed as the best way I see it is like a tax, right?
Mm,
And then the Polo Polo was a tithing once a year and a tax once a year. The Tu'itonga established certain areas where they could bring the Polo Polo once a year and
Yeah.
didn't have to come to Tongatapu. And they introduce an idea here that maybe the Cook Islands or Rarotonga was an intermediary, right? Like certain
Yeah.
cities where flow of materials or whatever comes to that city before it gets taken to the capital,
Mm.
right? And it made me think, what are the possibilities or the chances that Lalotonga is called Lalotonga because it was an intermediary point
Yeah.
for the tributes to say, bring the tributes to Rarotonga because that's where it will be collected on behalf of the Tuitonga before it's shipped
To
to
Tongatapu.
Tonga,
Mm.
right? Or something of that sort. So I thought
Mm.
that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Um,
Very interesting. Yeah.
Here's a question here from Tees. What do you guys think of the similarities between the Mayan headdress and the one worn by the Tongan chiefs? Have you seen those,
Oh,
Masi?
I think we did talk about it a little bit,
One
Tua.
time, right? Like the
Yes.
Tuitonga, where it has like that flat flaring
Yes.
out. So
Yes.
seems very similar. And the Mayans loved red feathers.
What?
Polynesians love red feathers. And it's
Yes.
when I say love, it's almost like a religious deal. There is a dedication and a significance of
Of
red
status.
feathers.
Yes,
Yeah,
of
for
being a very
status.
status. No, I like I'm a believer of the origin coming from the Americas, where a lot of their customs and technology, even the way we build our ruins and our um, you know agriculture is from the Americas. So I'm not surprised, Tease, that we took that headdress and adopted it into the Tuitonga, because that's very interesting too. I noticed that the only person that had a headdress was a Tuitonga. I didn't see Tuiganong Polu or Tui Hatagalawa have any headdress. So that was very specific for a headdress for the Tuitonga. That's just my understanding. I don't know if you saw anything like that. And
No, that's the way I view it too. I don't know of any sketches. Maybe there are, but the only ones I've seen is the Tuitonga
the Tuitonga.
wearing
But
it.
yeah, that's my thoughts there, Tease. Uh, Strong possibility it's a reference to Waihi, the Americas of the the people that we kind of came from, or where we kind of originated from to Polynesia. But I don't know, Tua. What's your thoughts on
No,
that?
no, I'm of the same
Yeah.
thinking there. Well, go ahead here. I'll read this next section, Mussy. It says
Okay.
in Polynesia, marriage partners of rank often sought outside of one's own borders. A number of cultural reasons have been given for this practice. There was often, especially in Tonga, I think it's
Mm,
the specific words is when you hear, oh yeah, they were marrying outside of the their islands, but then says especially in Tonga, meaning that's where the
there's no.
practice was most prevalent.
Yeah.
An idea that the body of a high chief is taboo, this would preclude Tongans from touching the body of the Tuitonga. However, this taboo was not applicable to non Tongans. For example, in former times, only a Samoan or Fijian could cut
Mm-hmm.
the hair of the Tuitonga, as no Tongan was allowed to touch the head of the king. This made the importation of foreign workers, slaves, and spouses advantageous, a niche that early Europeans in Tonga came quickly to fill,
Yep.
right? So that's where a
Yep.
lot of these Europeans found a way for them to fit into the culture is,
Make
and this
themselves
is,
useful.
yes, and this is very evident when you look at William Mariner's story. This is why Finau was very
Mm,
comfortable with William Mariner doesn't have to follow our practices because he's not Tongan,
yeah.
right? Not the same expectations.
Yes. Want me to
And
read that next paragraph, Tua? Or
yes, yeah.
okay. Another factor at work in foreign spouse selection is the idea held in Tonga, and to a lesser extent in Samoa, that sisters are of inherent higher rank than are their brothers. In this logic, the sister of the Tuitonga would theoretically outrank him. However, this ranking is more about social prestige and difference then political authority and power. A problem might arise, however, if the sister of the Tuitonga married a high-ranking, politically powerful Tongan man. Such a union might produce offspring possessing both more prestige and more political power than the actual paramount. In the cultural logic, such an imbalance could lead to war. In order to avoid this, high-ranking Tongan Samoans Fijians have traditionally exchanged spouses. If the sister of the Tuitonga married a high-ranking Samoan, their offspring would not be in direct competition with either the Tongan or Samoan paramount lines for power and prestige solely by nature of their birth. Although such offspring may choose to seek power and prestige later on, this would be considered a safe marriage politically. Mm-hmm.
Correct. So
Yeah.
we've heard the idea expressed that the Tuitonga and so forth married to Ha'amoa so often because that's how the Tuitonga got his royal blood, because it comes from there.
Yeah.
It is documented that that is not the reason. We've expressed it from the oral
Yeah.
history, right? But these people are saying, no, there's been documented studies done on it, that was the primary driver behind it. It was to make sure that no one else on Tongatapu consolidated power above the Tuitonga, or even the appearance of it,
Mm.
right? And there are other people who say, oh, only the Ha'amoa people were ranked enough or high enough rank to touch the Tuitonga's body. Well, no, that's not. It's
Yeah.
because they didn't want people in Tonga getting comfortable with the
Yes.
idea. Because if they're able to have access to the Tuitonga's body, it in a way elevates them. And they don't
Yes.
want that done. They want a
Yes.
foreigner to do that, because a foreigner is less of a risk. A foreigner is not going to consolidate power in Tongatapu. So it's a much safer thing, just like the marriages. And once again, it's actually the other way around. The outer islands got their prestige
Being
from
closer to you.
marrying to
Yeah.
the family of the Tuitonga. And that's
Yeah.
what drove that. Any thoughts or comments on that?
No, I was just saying too, when you say like, when you say like foreigner, we probably mean a distant relatives, right? Very distant, the why, because I'm just
Yes.
thinking like in Tongatapu, we're just saying foreigner because we don't want somebody within the sphere of the
Tongatapu area.
Tongatapu
Yeah.
area. The furthest island from the empire is the best person because one, I you elevate them and they are willing to serve you, and you still maintain your prestige among the people that you live by on a daily basis, kind of thing, because that's how you kind of maintain you know your prestigeness, kind of thing. That's what I'm
Yes.
thinking to with that, because the
No,
further you are in the empire, the better,
less
more
risk.
likely
Yeah.
you're gonna be picked to come and serve the Tuitonga of that time.
Yeah. Let me see here. The comments are starting to pick up. Let's not
Yeah.
get too far from it. Let me scroll down. Here's the example of Salamasina, right?
Mm, yeah.
Where it
Very
was
well known
her.
story.
Yes. Very well known story there. Let's come through some of the questions here. Let's change our format. Let's go with this one. It says, to go off the name Rarotonga Island, the previous names was Tumu Teva Varavo, Pukaikai o Taringa, and the unofficial name Havaiki, only said when referring to the land of an ancestor. Interesting.
Mm,
Rarotonga in our oral history comes from Karika Alia. When asked by Tahitian Tangia of the directions to Tumu Tevararvaro, when the Manua and Tahitian met out at sea, Karika pretty much told him Rarotonga down or leeward south. Okay, so that's some of
interesting.
the oral history behind that. Appreciate that, Legrand, Malo.
Yeah. Thank you.
Want to read this one, Masi?
Yes. Why do you think this is from Tees? Why do you think this information that seems so plain to see, especially with the historical dates of Tongan artifacts being dated oldest in Polynesia, not get pushed at all across the Pacific? What do you
What are your
think,
thoughts,
Tua?
Masi? Okay,
Uh,
I'll take a
yeah.
shot at this. For me, It's primarily because academia and the West don't want to accept that Polynesia was a nation of connected
Mm,
people, of sophisticated capabilities. They like the narrative of, oh, they're just a bunch of savages. You know what I mean? Oh,
mm.
they were able, yeah, they could navigate, but did they have the
Civilized
political and
civilization. I
yes,
don't. Yes.
did they have the sophistication of government, social structure, and stability, right? Because what do they like to call us? And yes, we're warriors, granted, we have
Yes.
physical attributes, but you don't have a stable civilization when all you have is warriors.
Mm.
Warriors are needed when law and order is no longer
An option.
successful,
Yeah.
right? But we also know that there's a lot of documentation that throughout Polynesia, there wasn't consistent large scale war, and that there
Yeah.
was stability, that there was structure, and that allows the population to flourish. But that only exists if there's political, social, legal, religious, and scientific knowledge to facilitate that stability. Um,
Mm.
and I think the academics um, don't like that, and they don't want to, and then you add to it the fact that all of us have accepted the colonization lines that have been drawn, that each island was an independent nation, that
Mm.
justified Europe in their, it was okay for us to cut this up because it's not like we went into a country and broke it
Yeah.
apart. These were all just savages separated from each other. We can
Yeah.
just create nations for them because it didn't exist. That's my
Mm.
initial response to that.
You don't know. My thoughts. T's. It is interesting. I mean, this is the reason why we started this platform to brought this idea is to discuss because we think it's plainly out there and enough evidence to suggest that Polynesia was a nation. The center being Tongatapu, run by the Tuitonga, and then funneled to the current Tuikangpolu with Tupo being the history of Polynesia. I don't know why it's taking so long. It does remind me of the days in just in the 90s and early 2000s when Polynesians were not navigators, and then finally everyone says how we're great navigators now, and that's a common thread right now in academia. But hopefully, more conversation starts to happen that recognizes that we were a sophisticated Polynesian civilization. Remember, we in order to develop these sophisticated ideas, especially ruined buildings and land moving,
Mm-hmm.
in order to develop these ideas you must have hundreds of years of peace in order to do this kind of work and not instability, which is wars and stuff, right? Because that seems to be the common theme with our very good Polynesian players in contact sports that saying that we're just natural warriors and stuff, and that is true. But there's a lot of gaps that were not being bestowed upon that we were thinkers, sophisticated people, and also we were technology creators, innovators in that
Yeah.
time because not many civilizations can move land and expand land to the ocean.
Mm-hmm.
So just I don't know why it's slow, but this is the reason why Tuak brought this uh, platform, Polynesian Ice Podcast, so that we can just start discussing and just project our ideas out there. So yeah.
No. Here's a couple comments here. How do you know me? Says I'm full Samoan and my DNA says I'm 60% Samoan, 37% Tongan, 3% Chinese. That's the whole point there. How do you know me? That's what we're saying. Like in the Polynesian Empire, there was no unique people that were called Samoan and Tongan. We were all just one people, one nation,
Yeah.
right? And it's more to think of it instead of thinking of us as nations, think of us as like villages or islands. The islands are villages
Yes.
within
Yes.
the context that we're used to. We would
Yes.
we would say, oh, Ha'amoa is like, oh, that's just one of the villages in the empire. In because
Yes.
this is in every village. I'm sure it is. Masi, maybe Masi can confirm because you were in Samoa for or Ha'amoa for a longer time, living there. But even with certain ways things are done, this village has their own set of rules on how to do a certain.
Yeah.
Same thing in Tonga. One village likes. We all have certain practices that we say, oh yeah, we kind of do the same thing, but this village just does it a little bit different than the next one, and they want to be more different, so they develop their own thing. That's how I feel that the Polynesian nation was, right?
Hmm.
If you wanted to experience how it's done on the Ha'amoa Islands, you go to that part of the Polynesian Empire. If you wanted to go see how the Hawaiians did it, something, or the Tahitians, but we were all unified, we were all one nation. Even Captain Cook himself in his journals says he was shocked that this nation spread out throughout the entire ocean. He said
Yeah.
they spoke the same language, they had the same religion, they had the same social structure. Captain Cook even called us a nation
Mm,
because he was like, these are the same people. I've
mm,
gone all over the place. These are the same people. They behave the same way, they talk the same way. This is just like going from the modern United Kingdom. You go to Scotland. Yeah, they're a little different, but they're still part of the United Kingdom. You go to
yeah.
England, you go to Wales. Yeah, there's unique things amongst them, but they're also unified as the United Kingdom.
Mm,
Um, so yeah, that's to me when I see that is like, oh, when you say 60% Samoa, oh, you're from the Samoan village and the Tongan village. We're all the same people.
and the Chinese. How do you know me? That's the laborers that came to Ha'amoa then, eh? And brought the
Mm-hmm.
sapasui. Brought the
So, yeah,
sapasui. Eh?
which is
Eh,
good
just a
stuff.
good. Would you, yeah, just a little joke there. How do you know me, Maro?
Malo. All right, I'll read through this one. Tuikana Kupolu, the current king of Tonga, Taufa'ahau Tupou IV, is the 22nd in the Tuikana Kupolu line. This royal family line of Tonga was founded in a direct connection to Samoa. Once again,
Mm,
we understand it's being treated as Samoa as a separate nation, but it was within the same nation. It's just from the islands group that the
yes.
Tongans typically called Ha'amoa.
Yeah.
In the middle part of the 17th century, the Tu'iha Takalaua, a line of ruling chiefs that had split from the Tu'itonga 6 generations earlier, married a Samoan woman named Limapo from Safata on Upolu. As part of her wedding diary, Limapo brought with her to Tonga an exquisite Samoan fine mat she named Manea Fainga.
Mm,
Limapo and Takalaua had a son named Ngata, who became a powerful chief and eventually split from the Tu'iha Takalaua line to create a new line of chiefs in Tonga. Ngata was often called the Tongan Kano Kupolu, flesh of Upolu, in honor of the islands his mother came from. The new line of chiefs was called the Tuikano Kupolu. At his investiture ceremony, Ngata wore the Samoan fine mat Manea Fainga'a, which his mother had brought with her. The present king of Tonga at his investiture ceremony in 1967, 22 generations later, was presented with the same Samoan fine mat, Manea Fainga'a. Both the fine mat and the name of his title show a direct link to Samoa.
yep. Yep.
Couple interesting things I want to add here. Once again, the narrative here makes it sound like separate nation Samoa, separate nation Tonga, and there
Mm,
was a link in there. We dispute that, right? This
yep.
is no different than one village marrying into another village. The other thing that our oldest brother Daniel was here, spent some time with him. We're
Yep.
really trying to work out where we can have him have more episodes. It's proving to be challenging, primarily because internet connectivity can be a challenge. But there were a couple things that I thought were interesting. First
Hmm.
off, they make it sound here that Ngata um, developed himself as a chief and then created the
Yeah,
Tuikanukupolu line. That's not the case, right? The Tuiha Takalaua made one of his sons the
correct.
Tuikanukupolu. This is if the Tuiha Takalaua said there's never gonna be a Tuikanukupolu, we wouldn't have a Tuikanukupolu today. So
Correct.
this kind of narrative here makes it seem like the Tuikanukupolu wrestled out of the Tuiha Takalaua a new chiefly line or kingly line, but that's not the case. Go
Tua,
ahead,
just to
Masi.
add on real quickly, this is where we talked about with the oral stories,
History.
right?
Yes.
History. There's the oral history from Tongatapu, then there's the oral history from Upolu. And then it's
Yes.
you, the viewers, will have to navigate which
Uh,
oral history is sound and makes sense and which one you take. It's just part of that oral history like we talked about.
no, 100%, right? Because if you're from Upolu or Ha'amoa,
Yes.
what side of the oral history are you going to push? Oh yeah, we pulled
Correct.
that out of the Tuiha Takalaua, right? We developed it, and then from the Tongan side is like, no, we created it because it was the guy's son,
Yes.
right? And the
Yes.
Tuiha Takalaua wanted to be a little bit more achy, meaning
Yes.
not to have the responsibility of the work, because
Yes.
the Tuiha Takalaua did a lot of work. The Tui
Yes.
Tonga created the Tuiha Takalaua to take care of the inasi, to take care of the administrative work. And here's a couple interesting things that Danny mentioned, Masi.
What's up?
The reason why Ngata was given the name Ngata. A ngata ho, like your power. Ngata means
Mm.
has a limit. It has an
Yes.
end. So
Yes.
ngata was given that title because this is where your power or influence ends. It only
Mm.
comes up to this
We've set
point.
a limitation. This is your limit.
Correct. This is your function. So that's where the name ngata comes from, right? So the nickname of the Tuikanu Kupolo today, which is why Tupo, let's change the view here real quick.
Hmm.
Right? It's Tupo.
Yes.
Okay. Danny shares the reason why it's called Tupo because there were two brothers. The older brother should have been the heir to the
Like
Tuikanu Kupolo.
the previous titles of the Tui Hatagalawa and the Tui Tonga. It's always kind of
Correct. Two
right.
siblings.
Yes.
However, you know how we talked earlier about the Tongan social and political structure, the intermarrying was
Mm,
important, right? However, the Tupo Lahi, his younger brother, had married into the Tuihatakalaua line, and they felt that that was a closer tie to the Tuihatakalaua. It was Kostler family,
mm, mm,
so it made it the preference was make the younger brother the Tuikanukupolu, even though it belonged, and Tupo Lahi, who was the heir, says, okay, I'm okay with that.
mm.
So in honor of Tupo's choice to say, yeah, I'll let my younger brother, because it
Okay.
made more sense politically for the
Yes.
relationship of the
Strategically.
Tuiha
Yeah.
Takalaua and the Tuikanukupolu, because the Tuiha Takalaua would give direction to the Tuikanukupolu. That's where the name of Tupo comes from, the
Mm,
nickname. Danny says that the nickname of the Tuikanukupolu before that was Mataele.
mm.
And the origin, just like Tuikanukupolu, it was
Yeah.
Kanome Upolu, but they
Mm,
shortened it to Kanokupolu.
mm,
Mataele was Mata Kihekerekere, meaning
mm,
the job of the Tuikanukupolu was manage the land.
mm.
Man, that's the administrative responsibility
The
of
day
the
to day.
Tuikana
Yeah.
Kupolo. The
Mm.
day-to-day administrative. That's why it was a difficult role
A
because
working
you're
one. A very
running
working.
the
Yeah.
empire, right? You're doing the day-to-day management of the empire. What he also said was very interesting. There are examples where the Tu'ikanukupolu later became the Tu'ihatakalaua,
Mm.
like Muriki Ha'amea. Muriki
Yes.
Ha'amea apparently was Tu'ikanukupolu before he became Tu'ihatakalaua.
Mm.
And the reason was, and this is interesting, Masi, because this has
Yeah.
challenged some of the things you and I have thought of.
Yeah.
So what that shows is there was not a conflict for many generations between the Tu'ikanukupolu and the Tu'ihatakalaua. It was the same family. It was the
Mm.
same family. And there were some people, because of certain instability in the Tu'ikanukupolu, there are certain people from the Tu'itonga and the Tu'ihatakalaua line that should have been the Tu'ikanukupolu or were offered the Tu'ikanukupolu, and they said no.
Mm.
They said, why am I gonna it for them? They viewed it as a step down.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're gonna make me, I'm the grandson of the Tu'itonga directly. You're gonna make me the Tu'ikanukupolu, and I have to go work every day. I have to manage the empire. I have to manage the Inasi. So there was actually that, even within those families, the Tu'ikanukupolu was not the preferred role. And there were certain, like Muliki Ha'amea, because of their dedication to the empire, they said, I will go down and I'll be the Tu'ikanukupolu. And I will run it. And then when the right time comes and we find a good person to be the Tu'ikanukupolu, I will go and be the Tu'ihatakalaua. But until we find that right person, they will go in. So
Interesting.
that makes it very interesting. Now, you know how you and I know this is kind of going a little longer than I had thought. You know how we've always talked about the Matai voting system for the Tu'ikanukupolu?
Correct.
Danny's perspective is the original for many generations for the Tu'ikanukupolu, it was father to son, father to son, father to son, father to son.
How long did that last? That would be my question.
It was, I want to say, like anywhere between 5 to 10 generations.
Okay. Okay.
Right? It was consistent.
Okay.
Then there was an issue. I forgot the term. It wasn't that there was an issue. What happened was there were 2 generations in a row. Shoot, I forgot the term. There's a specific term where there's only one child.
Okay.
There were 2 generations in a row where there was only one child, which means they had to go further back up into the genealogy to find a replacement.
Mm.
And because they were very specific in trying to make the marriages work so that you don't want a younger line or a younger ranked person to be the Tu'ihatakalaua and then have a higher ranked person blood wise in the family and so forth to be the Tu'ikanukupolu, because then it would be the higher or lower rank trying to give direction to a older rank, and it wouldn't work. Right? So what happened was there were two generations where this happened. And so when they went back up to try and find someone, they didn't manage the marriages as closely. So they had a really difficult time trying to fill the Tu'ihatakalaua, the Tu'ikanukupolu, because there were so many people that could have made a claim.
Okay.
And then it became unstable. And then you had to get all the group of those people to agree, kind of like a Matai system, but it wasn't organized to be a Matai system. It just got so chaotic because there were 2 generations of only one heir or only one offspring. It led to too many people having laying claim on it that you had to get everyone to agree. This is the one we all agree will be the Tu'ikanukupolu, so that no one else would challenge it and create instability.
Mm.
Interesting, which is very
Very
different
interesting.
from
Yeah.
many other historians we've spoken to. But
Mm.
like we said, we throw in all the different ideas.
Yeah.
Everyone can think about it, discuss it. I don't know. I thought I'd throw that out. Musty, any
No,
thoughts?
that is interesting. Thank you for that. No, that's interesting too, because so it was practiced father to son in the Tuican Polu line for some 6 to 10 generations, and then the heirs was only like there was a lot of becoming like one only child from like an offspring, right? That
Yeah,
happened quite a few times. That obviously when that offspring didn't make it or whatever, or it lasts as long, then you have a wider family that can have claim to be the next title holder. Is that correct?
exactly.
Kind of. Okay.
Yes. And then to compound that even further, Masi, some of the people they put in at Tuikan Kupolu were weak leaders.
Mm,
And I guess Danny said the 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 historical way of saying if it doesn't go father to son, father to son, father to son, the Tongan perspective is if you bring in another Tuikan Kupolu who didn't inherit from his father, it's considered a new line.
mm,
Right?
okay.
It's considered a new line because they didn't go from father to son. And they had a handful of consecutives where it wasn't father to son, which further led the instability.
Mm,
So this is why it makes sense, or at least could partially explain how Tupou the First was at least able to maintain it. It wasn't father to son because Tupou the First outlived so many of his children, but at least went from father to grandson.
yeah. Mm,
Eh?
yeah.
And then they say whakamau. That's when you whakamau a line, is when it goes at least from father to son. You have two generations of that. Then there's no longer a dispute. That other people
Yeah.
cannot have a claim. Osialu, father to son.
Mm,
Now there's stability. Now there's that line is established and it continue, which is why the current kingly line we have now
yeah.
is established.
Mm,
This further explains why Queen Salote was in a very precarious situation.
mm,
It was going to go through a transition where it wasn't going to be father to son.
yes. Yeah.
So the Tuikanukupolu line, in theory, the line had become unstable. So if there was anyone who could lay claim on the Tuikanukupolu line, Queen Salote was vulnerable.
Mm,
So what's their solution? Marry her to the heir of the Tuihatakalawa,
yeah.
which solidifies Queen Salote's position
It's
to
legitimate.
remain as the monarch.
Yeah.
Right? And then
Yeah.
now you could make the argument it's not the Tuikanukupolu who's in charge now because you inherit from your father, and this current king, his dad, is a descendant from the Tuiha Takalaua,
Yeah.
so
From
he's
Mua.
technically the Hui
Yeah.
Takalaua. Anyways,
Mm,
thought that was interesting. Any
that is
thoughts
very
on that?
interesting. No, thank you for sharing too. It provides some clarity and other ideas that our viewers and everyone can think about. Like I said, this is the platform for it. So, malo.
Yeah. Another interesting, just quick comment here. I highlighted here. This here they talk about all the different marriages of the Tuitonga to Haamoa. It's pretty
Yeah.
well documented. One of the
Hmm.
things that was interesting, he says, Samoans I have consulted could remember a number of historic Samoan Tongan marriages, but had difficulty thinking of any Samoan Fijian marriages, which once again
It's
goes to this
lower.
idea that it's
Yeah.
always mythic, right?
Mm,
It's always like more about Tevolo and some
mm,
crazy idea and not practical. So I
yes.
highlighted that because I thought that was interesting.
Yes, and another thing, right? A person from Haamoa and Upolu and Sabai or Tutuila and stuff will always look to Tonga to marry off their daughters, and then
Yeah.
if they couldn't get anybody, then maybe Fiji. But
Then you look
I'm not
local.
surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Read through this, Masi. There are a couple
All
things.
right.
Maybe when we read through it, I highlighted it for a reason, but let's have you read through it.
Let's go. The Tongan War, the single most written about event in the pre-contact relationship between Tonga and Samoa is the Tongan War. During this period, it is said that Tongan established some kind of control over Samoa. Most sources concur that this war took place in the 13th, 14th century. Ella, 1899, Fa'atonu, 1998, Carmer, 1994. These are the references. Melisea, 1987, Stilbo, 1995, Turner, 1984. Samoan oral traditions record that record record that Tongans launched an invasion of Samoa and successfully took control for a time until Tuitonga Talagay Faiki was forced out of Samoa by the brothers Tuna and Fata, founders of the Mediator line. Appendix Legend 33. The genealogies of both the Tuitonga and Marietoa lines agree almost exactly on the names and generations of the main characters involved in the Tongan War. This is fairly strong evidence that some kind of important conflict took place, indicative of the kind of regular and extensive contact that may have existed between these two archipelagos in the past.
Okay. I'm wondering if the reason why I highlighted this is
Some of the
um,
marriages between
yes,
both.
some of the marriages, but like right here, right? Tuitonga Talakai Faiki, right? This is the
Mm-hmm.
one from Legend 33, Marietoa,
Mm-hmm.
Marietau. He's the one that says it. And
Yes.
everyone, remember, some people were kind of poking back at us when we said it's just a little scuffle. It wasn't
Yes.
a war,
Yes.
full scale war. And once again, even in the oral history itself, Talakai Faiki never said I'm leaving. I'm
Yeah.
never
He's gonna
coming
come
back.
back.
He said I'll come back, but when I come back, I'll be your friend. Right?
Correct.
And this is where the Sa comes from, right? From
Mm-hmm.
what I understand, the Sa starts because
Yeah.
of this, because some of them were like, oh my gosh, they might be coming back.
Yeah.
All right. And so they put that. But what I'm getting to is this is Talakai Faiki. There's stories that he comes back to Ha'amoa anyway,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which goes to show this wasn't a full scale war. This
Yeah.
was an incident that happened, and further explains why Talakai Faiki was like, hey, good job, guys. Whatever. For
Yeah.
whatever reason,
Yeah.
he was impressed.
Yeah.
And then further explains why he gave that title, and why it became important. But look at what happens. Where is it? Right here. Tuitonga Uraki Mata.
Sapio
This is
Moa.
after 5 years. This is
Yes.
Telea. They
Yes.
lived in
Correct.
Ha'amoa 5 years.
Correct.
And this is after Talakai Faiki.
Yeah, and that goes along with what we've been saying with the five generation of the Tuitonga living in
Yeah,
Ha'amoa after the
living in
fact.
Ha'amoa. So
Mm.
so once again, I think this is important. Even if you just pay attention, this is where if you just pay attention to the history and the genealogy, even within that, you can be like, wait a second. This oral history right here says an invasion, right? An invasion of Ha'amoa. You notice they say here they don't agree what kind of the extent of the war. They just agree on the main characters and when it
Yes.
happened,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Because this is a lot of people don't like King Afa, but he makes a good point when he says, "Why didn't they kill Talakai
Yeah.
Faiki? Because that wasn't the intent. You kill the Tuitonga. Not only will the armies from Tonga and the rest of the empire who are loyal, who have intermarried to the Tuitonga, you're not just going to get Tonga. You're going to get Uvea, Futuna. You're going to get all the guys from Fiji. You're going to
Yeah.
get like this. It's almost like a suicide to kill
Yeah.
Talakai Faiki. But if you just wanted to prove a point to be like, Siana, you're overbearing.
Yeah.
You're overbearing
Yeah.
on the people,
It was a
you
little far
know.
more fishy kind of thing.
Yes, yes. It was
you
just
know?
a physical
Re-
expression of frustration.
yes, rebellious attitude kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, but the point is the marriages continue and the
Mm,
Tuitonga continues to come back. So, and then once again, when you say invasion, the idea is that Tonga was a separate nation, Samoa was a separate nation, and there was an invasion. No, 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 no.
correct.
There was an invasion. It's the same country. It's the
Yeah.
same people.
Mm,
It's just that village got sick and tired. Maybe Talakai Faiki was doing stupid stuff. I don't know.
yeah.
And they got tired of it and they said, we got to stand up for ourselves.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to oppress me to death, then I might as well fight you because
Fight
you're going
back.
to kill me anyway if
Yeah.
you keep
Mm,
oppressing me.
mm,
Anyways,
yeah.
I think that's why I highlighted this because right next to each other, the genealogy, which everyone agrees to, doesn't fit some of the oral description of what happened there.
Yeah. I concur. I agree.
Okay. Talks about what Tonga had. They go over of what the different things that Samoa, Fiji offered, right? They talk
Mm,
about Fiji offered all the
resources, the
different
trees.
spices,
Yeah.
the trees. They talk about Samoa had a lot of the mats and the
Mm-hmm.
stones, right? And then they talk about and these some things that stuck out to me that I thought were interesting that I never knew. It says here, what did Tonga have to offer? Fijian and Tongan traditions record that Tongans were often the source for highly prized whale teeth tabua in Fiji. I didn't know that.
Okay. Yeah. That's new.
But it makes sense when you step back. Who were the ones traveling long distances over deep waters would run
Yeah.
into whales,
Whales. Mm.
right?
Yeah.
That would make sense. In addition to trade objects, Tongans had a long tradition of offering their services as warriors in intra archipelago warfare. As discussed below, Tonga also appears to play an important intermediary role in the movement of goods and ideas through West Polynesia.
Yeah. That's pretty valuable, right? The ideas
Yeah,
of navigation,
yes,
probably. The ideas and goods
connecting
to
the islands.
yes.
And this
Yes.
also matches the archaeological studies on the axes, the stone
Yeah.
axes, right?
Mm,
That in Tonga they found 66% of them. And it was probably, and in the study that we were going to go on later on today, there was so much movement on the outer islands and very little movement of certain types of stone axes, even within Ha'amoa,
mm,
right?
mm.
Just to kind of show like the flow of goods. Want to read these two, Masi?
Yes. So the relationship between Samoa and Tonga in the last 5 centuries has been governed by the Tulatala Compact, a kind of non-aggression pact that refers to the promise that the Tuitonga called out never to invade Samoa after being expelled from Samoa by Tunai and Fata. In
Have
Tonga,
you? Oh, go ahead.
oh,
Have you
go
heard
ahead.
of
Go.
that? I'm not familiar with this.
No, no, no. I'm not too familiar with that saying they never invade Samoa, being expelled from Samoa by Tuna. No, because there's quite a few stories that it was not expelled. It was just he would always return, but in a friendlier manner, kind
Yeah.
of thing. But yeah, not
Anyways,
this one.
yeah,
Not this one.
interesting.
Yes,
Yeah, go on the next one here.
in Tonga, Captain James Cook was told in 1777 that Tongans had conquered Samoa and the Tongan royal family of Paulaho lived there. Various whalers and traders reported that Samoans acted as mercenaries for intra-Tongan wars. An English traveler claimed that a fleet of 10 Tongan war canoes sacked the village of Falealupo in Savaii in 1827. This post-Tula-Tala Compact conflict may be indicative of previous pre-contact Tonga-Samoa tension.
Hmm.
Interesting.
Interesting there. Continue over here.
Okay, one of the more humorous incidents involved a fleet of 6 Samoan canoes carrying about 300 people that arrived in Tonga delivering the bride for the Tuitonga son. The Samoans participated in the wedding festivities, which involved club fighting for sport. Mariner observed that there was some confusion between the two parties as to whether they would follow the Samoan or Tongan rules for club fighting. As Mariner reported, the difference of which is that the Hamoa custom allows a man to beat his antagonist after he is knocked down, as long as he perceives signs of motion, while the Tonga mode only allows him to flourish his club over his fallen foe, and the fight is ended. Hmm. No, you know what that reminds me too of the certain class of how you present yourself. Samoans are a little bit savage, more like behavior when they have their sport. No, that's what I'm thinking, right? After you
Yeah.
beat him, then you can just keep beating him as long as he can move his finger. He's still alive, right? He's still moving. The Tongan one is you knock
Once
him
he's
down.
down, he's done.
It's a lot more. It's a lot more. I don't know. It's a behavior of just a certain higher class of entertainment. You know what
Mhm.
I mean, Tua? It's
Yeah.
more civilized. It just that I find that very interesting. But I just thought I'd share that. I don't know if you had anything on that what I just
No,
read.
I mean I agree. I mean that's it's understanding that this is sport. Sport is for entertainment, not for the destruction of life,
Mm,
right?
mm,
And so that's the difference there. So
yeah,
this one is pretty much talking about the local konga that you told me, which I didn't know until
yes,
you brought it up.
yeah,
Um,
with the
that there was,
Wesleyan Church.
yeah, they talk about it's telling that did not express particular surprise at a canoe large enough to hold 150 people,
Mm,
right? Kind of talking about the size of the canoes. Um, Let me see here. They talk about some blue beads that
nice.
people in Manua, women in Manua, were wearing, and they say they got it from Tonga. And these
Mm,
oblong beads the Tongans got. The reason why I highlighted this is they said, "Oh, Tatui Tonga never set foot in Manua." Well, we're over here reported a young woman in Manua wearing a string of oblong blue beads. They said they were out of place, and they said that it was high value to them, and they said they got it from the Tongans.
there we go.
So obviously there was interactions with the people in Manua with the
Yes,
Tongans.
yes,
Okay, so
yep,
that's why that was highlighted in there for me. See right here, being told by Samoans that the beads came from Tonga.
yep.
Uh,
It seems like there was no scuffle. That's why it was just always just a peace and a respect. There's a lot
yeah,
of scuffling kind of habit in Upolu and Sabai. It seems like.
yeah. Um, Says these examples show that in historic times, contact between Tonga and Samoa by means of traditional canoes is well documented, but again, there does not appear to be an uh, as extensive a network of early historic connections between Fiji and Samoa,
Hmm.
right? So even the Europeans were like, Tonga and Samoa is super active in between each other.
Yep.
There's not
Yep.
a lot of high documentation of Samoa and Fiji.
Hmm.
There's also documentation of Tonga and Fiji,
Correct. Well, why is that,
right?
right? Like we said, the
Exactly.
roads, the roads all lead to Tongatapu, right?
Exactly.
The Tongatapu can connect easily with the
Everyone
various
else.
islands. Yes.
Yes. So once again, that to me is very telling. It says there is also no record of a significant interaction between Samoa and more distant archipelagos of East Polynesia in early historic accounts, although Williams reported a Vavai man living in Manua in 1832 who claimed to be the sole survivor from a canoe blown off course from Tubuai. Once again, that's not intended arrival in Manua. That was blown off
Accident.
course.
By accident. Yep.
Yes. Um, so they go over some archaeological stuff. They talk about some of the sources here and then the architecture.
I'm going to read
Eh,
that.
Yeah, read through the conclusions. We're kind of getting towards the end here, I believe. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Conclusions. Compelling evidence of pre-contact interactions in West Polynesia. We have established that Tonga and Fiji is mentioned in almost 40% of the Samoan legends we analyzed. At the very least, this demonstrates that pre-contact Samoans were well aware of the existence of Tonga and Fiji. Drawing on European accounts, we have documented regular canoe voyaging between these archipelagos, or at least through Tongan as an intermediary.
There we
Yeah,
go.
yeah. In early historic times, we have also presented evidence that trade of goods and exchange of spouses was well established by the time of European contact. Finally, archaeology
And I would pause
provide.
it right there real quick, Masi.
Mhm.
Once again, the well documented marriages are not with Samoa and Fiji, it's with Tonga and Samoa.
Correct.
But where is it
Correct.
also well documented? Tonga and Fiji, with the
Yes.
Tonga's family marrying into Fiji. Once
Fiji's high
again,
class. Yeah.
who's the intermediary? Who is the connecting
Yeah.
islands between Samoa and Fiji?
It's
It's
Tonga.
Tonga. Yeah,
Yes.
go ahead.
Finally, our archaeology provides us with empirical evidence of connections between Samoa and West Polynesia through province analysis of basalt artifacts, which strongly supports the existence of regular inter-archipelago voyaging and communication in West Polynesia. The nature of Samoa's
Just
what was that too?
just pause that once again. I just have to re-emphasize this
Yes,
because you need to realize what's being said here. Which strongly supports the existence of regular inter-archipelago voyaging and communication in West Polynesia. Yes, but what is the flow of the communication?
through
Samoa
Tonga.
to Tonga to Fiji,
Fiji.
from Fiji to Tonga to Samoa. Like that's
Yes,
the flow. If you just read this on its own, it makes it sound like, oh yeah, we were saying everybody was going. No, they consistently are saying Tonga was the intermediary there.
yes, yeah. No, great point, Tua. The nature of Samoa's pre-contact interaction with Tonga may have been different than with Fiji.
There we go.
There we go.
Um, let's go through this one, Mas.
Okay. What what could account for this difference in the role of Tonga and Fiji in Samoan oral traditions? Perhaps the Samoan connections to Fiji have always been limited. Perhaps there was an older connection that has been supplanted in more recent pre-contact times by Tonga. In reviving the Samoan oral traditions of Fiji, one gets the sense that they tell of Fiji as if they were hearing about Fiji secondhand from someone else. Possibly much of the Fijian presence in Samoan oral traditions comes through Tonga as an intermediary. Indeed, extensive direct contacts have been shown in pre-contact and historic times between Tonga and Fiji, especially the easternmost Lao group in Fiji. But very little evidence for direct contact between Samoan and Fiji has been found in our study. In the simplest terms, geography, along with distance and configuration of islands, places Tonga in the middle of interactions between the main archipelagos of the region. The effects of the geography alone are shown in models of connectivity. Yep.
Okay. So now you can understand why in Ha'amoa their ideas of Fiji are almost like mythical. Eh? Because
Mm,
they're it sounds like, and that's why they're getting these conclusions. It's because it was the Tongan warriors who would go fight in Fiji and probably telling the stories of like, dude, there's these people in Fiji, they are cannibals, they do voodoo, you know what I mean? There's all this crazy stuff.
they're
So
they're
it's the
dark. They're much
Tongans.
darker than us. They have a fizzy
Yes,
hair.
yes, right. And so they're coming back and telling those in Ha'amoa, like, hey, this is what's going on. And then that's reflected in the oral history and what's told about what
mm,
Fiji is about.
mm,
Okay.
mm.
Now, you know what makes that interesting? That's
What's that?
why all the like some of the stories about the origin of tattooing and
Mm,
coming from Fiji. But if we look at this, the only real contact Fiji and Ha'amoa had was through Tonga.
yeah, yeah.
So one
And
could
then
make the, yeah. So it's very interesting that if you guys did have extensive contact with Fiji, it's because it came through Tonga,
via
or at
Tonga.
least that's
Yeah.
what this is kind of pointing towards.
Mm, interesting. Did you want me to start on the next paragraph too?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Okay. The
Go ahead.
notion of Tonga as an intermediary in both trade and cultural diffusion is not a new one and is usually described as the Tongan Maritime Empire, asserting Tongan domination, whether in actual political power or through cultural or economic influence, or nearby archipelagos. This extended imperial influence in the region could facilitate the movement of goods and ideas to islands that have little or no direct contact. As Swanee and Grove's 1998 most convincingly portray the environmental circumstances that favor an outward looking and expansionist Tonga, which could have provided information about Fiji to Samoa. Indeed, when discussing Samoan views on cannibalism, whaler J. W. Osborne wrote in 1835, they often have heard of the Fijis from Tongatapu people, who visit here often. They cannot bear the idea of being thought cannibals. The influence of Tonga as a second-hand source of knowledge about Fiji and a lack of direct Samoa Fiji contact may account for the mystical and far removed role that Fiji tends to play in Samoan oral traditions. Archaeological evidence has long supported the idea that Samoa-Tonga-Fiji were most extensively connected at the earliest colonization times about 3,000 years ago, followed by a waning of interconnections as archipelagos became more independent and self-sufficient. While archaeological evidence offers insight over extended periods of time, the use of oral traditions and early historic evidence allows us to better characterize, even if not so concretely, the more recent relationship between Samoa and its neighbors. If Samoa, Tonga, Fiji were all closely interconnected, during their initial colonization phase, it appears that Samoa has maintained closer ties to Tonga, as recorded by oral traditions and early historic evidence. Little evidence of direct pre-contact interaction between Samoa and Far East Asia, Polynesia.
Yeah. Any thoughts, or you're good to continue? I mean,
Um,
it's pretty self-evident. I mean, it's the pattern is getting pounded into you. Like there becomes pretty obvious, right? There's
yes,
like Tonga was the center, the spoke of the wheel.
yes. Well, and that's the other thing too is Fiji, Fiji Fiji's connections to Samoa is it seems like to a the whole like the knowledge of navigating I like at ease was the knowledge that Tongans maintain to themselves maybe I feel like to a maintain to themselves
Hmm.
because it seems like I'm sure there are Samoans that would go because we have stories of Samoans or Samoa coming to the other islands, but going the knowledge to going to Fiji, there seems to be not a very common. It's always right. It's the same thing with Fiji. Fiji coming
Yeah.
to Tonga,
Well,
Samoa coming
it's
to Tonga, but Tonga having the knowledge to go to Hawaii, go to Cook Island, go to um, you know Fortuna and
mhm.
Fiji. It's Samoa. That's I don't know that's what it seems like that the Tongans
Yes.
maintained.
Well, the thing is, and that's why I like to say, like, I want all the viewers and the listeners to say, like, when we say Tonga, we're just trying to say the capital, right? The
Yes,
capital
uh, the,
had the bigger library of how to get to
yes,
different places.
yes,
and it was a library of knowledge that certain family groups had. So obviously, when those families on Tongatapu are marrying into Ha'amoa, well, guess what? Some of that knowledge would go there, right? And a lot
Mm,
of that knowledge would be, oh, we have family in Tongatapu, so we know how to get there. We might have
yes,
some family in Uvea, there were some who
we
get
know how
there.
to get.
But we don't have any real business getting to Fiji. So we don't get that knowledge, right? And
Mm,
so the this is where we're all talking about the all roads lead to Tongatapu. That's why they had all the different stones. That's why they had all the different styles of houses, right?
yes,
The Wharepamanua, you can have all the knowledge and the stuff came
the
to
different
Tonga,
the different dances too,
the
the
different
Hamoa
dances.
dances, and then there's the
Yes.
dances from the Futuna and Uvea. Like, yeah, I mean, you can go on. It
And
was just
yeah,
like a
and
melting pot.
exactly. And so is it true about the navigational knowledge,
Mm,
right?
mm,
There's a reason why the Ha'amonga is on Tongatapu and not somewhere else,
yes.
right? There's a reason why all the Langis are on Tongatapu and not somewhere else. There's a reason why the 100-acre man-made land reclaimed from the ocean is on Tongatapu and not found somewhere else,
Mm,
right? And there's a reason why all the flow of the goods and the ideas was through Tonga and not through somewhere else.
yeah.
But we were all one
Yes.
nation, one people. Certain families had these types of knowledge and influence, not all, but the little bit of knowledge and influence through the intermarrying through Tongatapu meant iyo. Some people on the outskirts of the empire would have access on how to get to certain places.
Yep. Yep.
You
You
want
want
me
me
to
to read that
continue?
one? I
Yeah,
can
let
read
me.
that one too.
Okay, go ahead.
However, it is striking how little connectivity Samoa shows with the what is that? I can't see the logo
More
covering the
distant.
more distant archipelagos of East Polynesia. This is not to discount any possibility of interaction between these places. Indeed, basalt artifacts sourced to both Samoa and the Society Islands have been excavated in the Cooks, suggesting a possible intermediary role similar to the described above for Tonga. However, that far East Polynesia is not remembered in Samoan oral traditions, or at least the oral traditions analyzed in this study. While Tonga and Fiji are mentioned again and again, strongly suggests that any contact with East Polynesia was much less extensive. Indeed, it appears from oral traditions that the existence of the more remote parts of East Polynesia may not have been recalled in pre contact Samoa. This may not be especially surprising since the distances between East and West Polynesia are substantially greater than within West Polynesia. As Irwin 1992 shows, this result is much smaller voyaging target angles from West Polynesia to the far away islands of East Polynesia, from Samoa to the Societies as compared with 55° from Tonga to Samoa, making voyaging significantly more difficult than within West Polynesia. Perhaps
Want
the
to
lack of
pause it real
okay,
quick, Masi.
yep.
This is why the Tu'itonga said, Eastern Polynesia, you guys all don't have to come to Tonga twice a year. It
Mm,
was extremely burdensome because not only are you traveling, but you're supposed to bring all the
bring
gifts,
yes.
all the produce, all that stuff. Pakahela. And I'm wondering that the Cook Islands or Rarotonga was called Rarotonga
Mm,
because that was the intermediary point from East Polynesia and Rarotonga, below Tonga or under Tonga, meaning okay, Tonga, but you're gonna function as a Tonga,
yeah.
as a meeting point to bring all that stuff before it's taken. I don't know. That was just some of the thoughts that came to my
Yep.
mind.
Yep. No, and just like the connections, right, with East Polynesia, Tonga. it's Tonga was that connection to East Polynesians. More, maybe a few that would sell, but it wasn't like a constant movement of back and forth like Tonga
Yeah.
was with East Polynesia. Because, like I said, we still have names from East Polynesia in Tonga
And
Tapu
Tongatapu.
as
Yeah.
as of today. Yeah.
Yeah. No, 100%. Go ahead, Mas.
Perhaps the lack of Samoan oral traditions involving Far East Polynesia is a relatively recent phenomenon and represents a contraction of the voyaging sphere between West and East Polynesia. While the Tonga Samoa-Fiji voyaging sphere remained active until historic times, in any case, our present
Do you see it?
study,
Mhm.
yep, present study has focused only on Samoan oral traditions. It would be interesting to investigate this question from the perspective of East Polynesia oral traditions. Indeed, on the map that Tupaya, a Tahitian navigator and priest, helped to draw for Captain Cook in 1769, one can find both Manua and Savai listed. Finally, our study has tried to demonstrate that evidence from oral traditions can be valuable tool in attaining a greater understanding of the picture that archaeological, linguistic, and early historic evidence paints of past interactions with Oceania.
Mm.
Yeah,
Interesting.
very
Mhm.
interesting.
So it seems
So,
like the Eastern Polynesians, or at least this one navigator, was
Tupaya,
familiar with Manua.
yes, yes. And looks like put Savai. So obviously, they knew there were islands there, but it's funny because they say I'm surprised they put Savai. Well, right, they put Savai there because they knew that was a very historical place. Because it makes me think of the Pulimele, where the Tuitonga used to live five
Yeah.
generations. So to me, if you're in the other parts of the Tuitonga Empire, you got to know where the Tuitonga is living were most of the days except Polo Polo and Inasi. So Savai is an important figure with
Well,
the Puli
not
Malay.
only that, but Manua, because was it was who was the Tuitonga? I mean, Kaulfonua Fekai, some of the oral history says that his mother was a Tui Manua.
And
And so
he
they
hold
would,
held
and he
both.
held it and could have been in Manua. So they would have
That's
known of
true.
Manua if we
Yes,
follow your logic, right?
yes.
That they knew those places because at certain times the Tuitonga resided in those areas.
Hmm.
So interesting.
Very interesting.
Let's see if I have anything else highlighted here. No, these are
Very
the
informative,
stories.
man. Very
Very
informative and very
interesting. So
good.
I think this is the rest of this is like the stories themselves.
Hmm. Of the actual what they've recorded from various people in
These are the
Samoa
oral histories that
or
they
oral history.
recorded and walked through and analyzed. So, anyways, looks like oh my gosh, yeah, we're not going to get to the second study, but the second study that we were going to looked at archaeological evidence that showed the same thing. See, this is what was interesting. They just looked at the oral history,
Hmm.
and then you look at the archaeological evidence, it matched what they were
Yes.
saying, right?
Yeah.
Stone from Fiji, stones from different parts of Fiji, stones from Ha'amoa, stones, flakes from the Cook Islands. You find it all in Tonga.
The genealogy of the marriages, and it reaches that five. What we say from our oral history that the Tuitonga stayed in Ha'amoa.
Mhm.
It matches that time frame, and it's the same archaeological evidence with the Purimede because it
Yes.
dates to that time frame. So it's like you can piece them together.
Yeah. And I really like the comment that you said earlier, Masi. And I think, you know, that could be a t shirt coming up here is, the Polynesianized podcast, Navigating History, right? Because that's what we're
Mm,
doing. Our
yes,
ancestors navigated the great oceans to connect each other because we were all one big nation, one big family. and how you maintain those relationships, it was navigating the ocean. Now that we're far away from those times where we know every corner of the ocean, we have GPS.
Mm,
Now it's navigating and maintaining our relationships throughout Polynesia, the Polynesian nation, by navigating the oral history, the scientific studies, looking at the genealogy to reconnect us as Polynesians in the modern world,
yeah.
to help maintain the relationships within the Polynesian nation. So that's my closing comment. Masi, hand it over to you, to say whatever you have and close us out.
All right. Well, thank you, Tua, for bringing and organizing this on this digital live cover session on the Polynesianized podcast. I appreciate all the viewers and their questions. It was very good to have a live interaction and discussion. I appreciate everyone's contribution into the Polynesianized podcast. I'm gonna leave you two things like we always do: stay curious and ask the hard questions. Until the next one. See ya.
Peace.